All right, so for my engine, I will be adding a custom feature of support for 2D rigged animations. And if you're not familiar with what that is, a really common industry solution for that is using Spine 2D to create them. So here you can see our PNG character essentially rigged, and if I go and manipulate the bones, you can see that it is very easy to do so versus having to hand draw or manipulate these. Where the utility of it is you can take the bones and in 5 keyframes make a very nice looking animation, as you can see here. So what does it look like to add support for the exports from this software into our engine? Well, Spine 2D and the company that makes it, Esoteric Software, makes this very, very easy. There's a ton of official runtimes, not only for C++, but also specific applications like even SDL. Um, that's great. It makes it super easy to put it into the project. I've already integrated it into the engine, which you can see here. Just the example. There we go. Right now, this is just in the init, all in the init, and it's just being called at the startup. Um, but to make it into like its own component, I'll be essentially just translating this logic to be more modular. Um, so that's the example file running in the engine. There's a huge asterisk though, and the reason that I'm no longer certain I want to go with this is the Spine runtimes license. So basically what this comes down to is any iteration you use of this, you have to own a license to Spine 2D to even use the software. Um, like any sort of open source, any basically anything you do with these runtimes they provide, you have to own a license, which is fine. The way I was thinking of doing it was okay. Then the Spine DB, whatever things relate to Spine, I will kind of like make them into a module, and then in the main engine, have some like um, compilation flags to prevent like certain things from running if you don't have the Spine 2 DB stuff. So that was my plan, and it would work. But then the thing is, I want to be able to make something I can actually use, and I don't have a Spine 2D license, and the trial version you can't save in that. So like, what is the option here? I did some research and I came across Dragon Bones. Now the great thing about Dragon Bones is that it's free. The caveat being the company that makes it went out of business, so they have no are no longer updating it. So kind of like what you see is what you get. Uh, but it is very pretty much pretty close parity with the features of Spine 2D. So as you can see, the pose mode, I can move things around. Great. And then going over to the animations, um, same idea. 3 keyframes, we can get a pretty expressive animation. Now, the issue, given that the company no longer maintains their own runtimes, is that any of the open source runtimes, which again, that's the nice thing about this MIT license from the official company, uh, any of the open source runtimes they had are being just maintained by the community at this point. Thankfully, it's relatively active, and it seems that the Chinese market still actually uses this software uh, as being the only free kind of Spine 2D style software that's available. And fully free, all feature like having inverse kinematics available on the free tier versus Spine 2D having to pay $370 if you want access to that, and mesh deformation. So the challenge then becomes, how do I get this working in SDL? As you can see, there's just no specific SDL runtime here. There is one for SFML, which is very helpful. If I, instead of wanting to use render copy extended, I just directly use render geometry. A lot of that more complicated logic that we haven't really been working with is already done in here. I would just need to translate that. Um, so, um, but I essentially have to integrate the data from the C++ runtime library to work with SDL. That is the task. So the other challenge is the only online English API documentation I could find was archived through the Wayback Machine, and some of these links are still broken. So I don't have everything. I did find a complete online hosted documentation, but it's all in Chinese with no option for English. So I can translate it, but that presents its own challenges, of course. All right, so here is some of the refactor in progress. I'm just going like file by file. There's about 14, um, and I think it will be doable within the next week, along with making the component for my engine. But essentially, um, given SFML uses a more object-oriented approach, things like overriding object functions, we don't really do that in SDL. So a lot of the refactor so far has just been removing some of that. So for example, getting rid of this, and just directly taking the data in from the matrix and then assigning that. And then other things map one to one. So like this rectangle, getting the bounding box, um, I can just return the same data type there. But yeah, that's all as far as I've gotten for this week. In general, my plan for next week, as I said, is just to finish translating and adding any additional functionality I need to get things rendering in SDL, and then working on the component, which at that point should be pretty straightforward, I'm assuming. And fallback plan is just to go back to the Spine 2D approach, which I already have mostly implemented. It would just be making the component for that. So we'll see how the week plays out. I'm kind of a little bit in between. I wish I had a little bit more time this week, but I think I'm in a good spot.